Okay, so for the second one, I'm going to do something very similar. They look almost identical, except for this one is in pleats and this one is in gathers. And we're going to use the same technique, but how we finish it will look different, and the ultimate shapes will be different, and the sizes might be different because we're not going to be going by a ratio. We're going to be going by how much of a fold that we decide to create for our pleats. So this is what we're going to do here. I've got my gathers, same thing, not my gathers, my labels and everything taken care of. Now what I can do is I can just break down where I want to have all of my pleats. So I'm going to have a pleat here at center front again. On my drawing, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I think that might be ambitious. Yeah, we could do 6. It's good to, I can decide at least where I want my first pleat. I'm going to have my first pleat go right here. I might actually bring it down a little bit from the dart point. I'm going to bring it down 1/2 inch from the dart point so that I have more of an ability to do construction and work with the seam allowance a little bit better. So I'm coming down 1/2 inch from the bust point on this. That leaves, if I did a pleat every 3/4 of an inch, that would give me 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pleats. So every 3/4 of an inch, I'm going to draw a line. And each one of these represents a pleat. While I'm in the process, I'm just going to do the same thing over on this other dart leg. And this time I am squaring over. So I took a square line 1/2 inch down. It's 90 degrees that I took from here over to the edge. So just make sure that that's a nice 90-degree line. That's going to make finishing it up later a lot easier. And I'm just going to do a line that's parallel to that every 3/4 of an inch. That way my pleats on the side here will match up with my pleats in here. And while I'm at it, let me just finish drawing in my neckline. About like that. There's my new neckline. While I'm at it, I can just draw in my pleats up here. On my drawing, I had 3 pleats. And let's just put them each 3/4 of an inch apart. So I have all of my pleats drawn. This next section is going to look very, very similar to what we did with the gathers, but I'm going to have to do a lot more math associated with it. I can start by cutting everything out though. But the nice thing here is I actually don't have to worry about the gather to number. I don't have to pay attention to that, because every single section is going to be engineered. So I'll just cut. If you want, you can make little marks to help keep track of all this, or you can take each section at a time. So I'm going to do that. I'm going to cut one off. I'm going to tape it on to some other paper. And I think I would like these pleats to go pleat back 1/2 inch and then unfold 1/2 inch. So I'm going to add 1/2 inch for the fold under, another 1/2 inch for it to get back to this point. So it's going to fold up and then down, up and then down, up and then down. So, but I have to actually put in an exact measurement for each of those folds. I'm going to use my center front line to help organize everything. Then I can just cut this off. And tape this back on. Now I can do the next pleat. Extend my center front. Add the 1/2 inch that it's going to fold under, the 1/2 inch that's going to fold back. I've given myself a little bit of paper there still to be able to tape it. Cut off my next chunk. And you're just going to go bit by bit. So I'm going to do this through to the end. Once I've gotten to this point, unlike the gather where I just draw a straight line, connect it all and say gather 2, I actually have to perfect each of these. So I'm going to have to go in and fold all of this. So pleats can take a little bit longer, obviously. But I'm going to fold this up the direction that it's going to pleat and then down to where I want it to finish. There's one little pleat. I'm going to do this next section as well. And I'm going to do this all the way down my pleats. Once we get to the end of this, I could have added actually a whole bunch of paper in here as well to help do all my seam allowance. I can also add that later. So what I'm going to do is grab my ruler with all of these pleated in place. There's my center front. Make sure that you've got all of your pleats perfectly closed before you do this. Here is my dart leg. Once you've cut your dart leg, you're going to end up with, instead of a straight line, you're going to end up with a little jagged line. And that little jagged line, all of those have been perfected. If they're doing weird things on the back, you can always come in and tape them down. But this jagged line is now the shape that it needs to be for us to be able to finish it. So we'll come back in afterwards and add our seam allowance. But before we do that, I can just say from this line to this line right here, just like we did before, I draw a little arrow indicating that this is how it gets folded. Each one of these will have a little tiny notch. So once I add the seam allowance in, I'm going to come back in and everything gets notched. Now we can move on to the next one. So for this, it's very similar to what we've done in the past. You slash it open. I think I only want all of these to have just 1/2 inch of depth. So I'm going to end up adding 1 inch in this space. So what that looks like is put this piece of paper into place. I figure out what 1 inch is, so here's my edge. Figure out what an inch is from there. Into this point there. And I can tape the entire thing down. Do the same thing to the next section. Adding an inch here. And I'm going to do this all the way down to the bottom. Once you are done with all your pleats, I'm going to get rid of some of this extra paper so that it's easier for me to fold, because we have to fold every single one of these, and it will be basically like perfecting a whole bunch of darts. So to get good pleats, it can actually be a lot of work. To do the gathers, it was just sort of like draw a line, smooth everything, and say gather two. When we do pleats, we have to fold everything and perfect every single corner to make sure that when it gets sewn together, we're doing it right. So I'm going to go ahead and fold every single one of these in the way that it's going to be sewn. So just think about whenever you have to fold something to finish it and perfect the edge, and this goes for darts as well, you fold it before you cut it the way that you intend to have it sewn. Once it's all been folded, that's gonna look cute. It's gonna look really cute. We grab our ruler, and I happen to know that this is a straight line, and I'm just using a ruler to hold it down. We cut along that edge so that when it opens up, you can see each of the little tiny points that get formed. And then each of those get a notch. Every single one gets a notch. And a little arrow indicating the direction that it gets folded. It looks very similar so far to this one, but shape-wise you can see there's a little bit of a difference between each of them so far. Very similar technique, but with the pleating, there's a lot more work into every single pleat that you want to introduce. You have to go in and perfect. So let's do this last one. I'm going to do it very similarly to the way that I did before. So I'm going to cut this off here. Cut through. And I'm going to add on one side, I want it to be a bigger pleat on the exterior, so I'll have that be a full 1/2 inch. And on the interior, I want it to be a 1/4 inch. This time though, and you could do this, this is another method just for perfecting it. What you can do, what I mean is you could perfect the gathers this way. Find a midway point. So I know that this needs to fold 1/2 inch. This is going to fold, this is going to fold a full inch, 1/2 inch here, 1/2 inch here. This is going to fold 1/2 inch, 1/4 inch here, 1/4 inch here. But I can square off this line both directions to find that. And in fact, this is probably a better method than the way I did it on the gathers. So if on the gathers you do it the other way, you're not going to be at fault. If you ultimately want to do more accurate method. This is probably a more accurate method. Neither way will get you very far away from what you actually want, though. Add that on. And I have my pleat. Get rid of this extra paper. Cut the next one. Tape on some paper. Lots of tape goes in. Every time you do an added fullness, be prepared to use tape. So I want it to be 1/2 inch down there, 1/4 inch down here. Square off that line back to my old point and mark my new point. Do the same on the other side. Tape it back on. When I am doing pleats, I don't like to cut everything apart in one go. I like to do it bit by bit so I can see it forming. Taped that onto the wrong spot. I needed to get taped on. Right. Like that. And then for the final one, I'll do the same thing. And just like every time before this, we have to perfect our darts, perfect our pleats. So I'm going to come in here and fold them exactly the way I want them sewn. Just like I want them sewn. And once they're all closed, in this case I actually think I could add my seam allowance right now. Cut off both sides. And when it opens up, get rid of some of the excess paper on the back. When it opens up, you can see some of these get really pointy and interesting shapes. When you go in, you might need to change the direction of the seam allowance a little bit. If something doesn't work, you can always erase it or hash it out. That the seam allowance should follow that stitch line. And depending on the curve, the point for your seam allowance may go in or it may go out. But do remember to go back in, and in this case, we're going to go back and do this to everything. Add seam allowances everywhere and add notches at every single point. It can get tedious, but you got to make sure that they are all there. And that you have arrows pointing between all of the notches indicating how they're going to be finished. So I'm going to go in and just go to town putting on my seam allowances and finishing up my notches, and I'll come back once it's done. Alright, once I have completely finished everything, what you need to look for to make sure that you're completely done is a notch at every single location your seam line should follow, your seam allowance should follow your seam line, so it will be jaggedy. Notch everywhere. All of it. Make sure that all of your notches are present, including the ones that don't have anything to do with the pleats. I'm not going to go crazy on notching out all of these teeny tiny lines when it comes to pleats, because in some ways when I look at the pattern and I see those lines, it shows me a lot of fold lines. So I'm not going to go crazy notching, hashing all of those out with this particular thing. Note at the center front, which is a fold, I don't have any notches. You cannot notch an area that doesn't have a seam allowance. So anywhere there is a seam allowance, notch. If there is no seam allowance, do not notch. So at the end, this is what we've got. These are the two patterns that you're going to be turning in. One that is all of the gathers, one that is all of the pleats. And there you go.